Good morning, good morning, good morning. So, hope everybody having a good day. Good morning. And wake up refreshed with a great attitude. I woke up feeling amazing and peaceful. I can't complain, Today was wonderful. About to go get some breakfast. So, finally, should got breakfast. Pops. You already know when we gotta get breakfast. He already got his breakfast, so they said they got like blueberry muffins. So I'm not down with the blueberry muffins. But I'm tired. Actually, yeah, I'm kinda tired. I ain't gonna cap. I'm gonna just lay back right here a little bit. You know how, comment below, you know how we go on vacation. You want to sleep a little bit longer. You know you don't want to miss nothing. How you doing? Let's see what they got. Good morning. Let's see. Blueberry. Have a blessing. Yeah, I just got me a blueberry muffin. How you doing? So, another day. We're supposed to be going to another beach. I think it's called Pilot Island. Something like that. Supposed to be heading to another beach. So stay tuned for that. Would have went to the pool, but I'm not into the pool anymore as I got older. I don't know. Maybe once I see my daughter, I'll go in the pool. Beautiful view. Oh, this just got me tired. It's a beautiful view. Absolutely beautiful. So thankful for what I can see, even though I can't see that good in my center vision, but I'm good in my peripheral. But we definitely I'm gonna go ahead and eat this muffin, blueberry muffin, and then we're gonna see how the day go and take you on the journey.
Of England ruled that we could be an international port of entry into the United States, in other words, a seaport. Once he did that, we became a pretty busy and important seaport in colonial times. It also resulted in this area becoming a very wealthy area, due mostly to our rice. We were the #1 rice exporting seaport in the world until the Civil War, which changed the lifestyle here forever. There was another export that in the 1700s eclipsed the importance of rice for about 40 years. And that was called indigo, a plant that made a blue dye and an ink. So as we get going on the tour, I'm going to start out by telling you a little bit more about indigo, why it was such a pricey export, and a little bit more about King George II and why he would let a little nothing village become a seaport as early as what he did, 1732, because that really ended up putting us on the map and making us the town that we are today. So, if y'all are ready, off we go. This is so cute.
Alright, so we're going to tour around the Georgetown. I had to put on my sunglasses. It's pretty shady. What you do? I don't.
Is my microphone pretty good? You can hear me? Okay.
No, we can't hear. Can y'all hear?
You can.
Can you hear okay?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, all right. Indigo was a plant that made a blue dye and an ink. It is not indigenous to the United States or South Carolina. Sea captains brought the seeds over from the West Indies, mostly Antigua, and our climate and our soil proved to be ideal to grow indigo, and so we began exporting it to Europe. Uh-oh, this might be my last people. Sorry, I'm going to have to answer this call.
I know I heard the thing
No,
ring
it
too.
was not. Sea captains brought the seeds over that grew the plant, and our climate and our soil proved to be ideal to grow indigo. And so we became the source of countries over in Europe, and that's because there had been a war over in Europe in the early 1700s that involved England, France, Spain, and Portugal. And when that war ended, England no longer had a country to get indigo from. And they knew that over here in South Carolina, we were growing it very, very well. And so we became their source. As soon as that happened, a lot of money could be made here. Now, there were other reasons for the popularity of indigo blue dye all over Europe. Ladies liked it, and royalty liked it because it was the only color of dye in those days that was color fast. In other words, the indigo blue dye adhered well to cloth, and that was not true of other colors back then. Back then in the hot summer, the other colors tended to rub off on the skin. That was not a very pretty sight. So, once we became the source, we started to earn a lot of money here from the plantations. Now, in 1732, King George II received a petition from the citizens of Georgetown asking to be a seaport. And they told King George that they were angry with him because they did not understand why they had to freight cargo all the way to Charleston. They said, why do we have to do that? That is ridiculous. We have a river here. We have an ocean inlet here. And amazingly, King George agreed that Georgetown, South Carolina would make a fine seaport. And he based it on two things that he learned about us. First of all, it was our Sandpit River right over there to your right on our harbor walk. The Sandpit River is the shortest river east of the Mississippi. It's only 9 miles long. However, the Santa River was big enough and deep enough for ships to come in and pick up cargo. The second reason was Georgetown has prevailing winds, and our prevailing winds would fill the sails of those schooners, and off they would go to ports of Europe. So because we met those two ideal conditions, we got to be a very early seaport. And that was when a lot of money, more money, was made on the plantations, because no longer did the growers have to go through Charleston anymore for the duties and the tariffs. The fees were much, much higher. Now, over here to the right, where that fence is, this big empty space was the site of a massive fire about 8 years ago. It destroyed 8 businesses. Most of the owners lived upstairs, so they lost their homes as well. We lost no lives in that fire, and we're very grateful for that, but we did lose history, because these buildings on your right were originally built in 1848. Now I'm going to pull over and stop here for a moment at our clock tower building. This is one of the most historic buildings in our county. In the 1800s, this building served as our town hall. And it was in this building that the Confederacy came to an end for the citizens of Georgetown when the town council surrendered to the United States Navy in this building February 24, 1865. It's a Rice Museum today. And on the right, you'll see a plaque dedicated to the Marquis de Lafayette. And Lafayette came over from France to help us in the Revolutionary War. This is where Lafayette landed. He spent his first night in America right here in Georgetown. It was June 1777. Lafayette was a young man, just 19 years old. But that young man became a military genius and a major general in Washington's Continental Army. After 3 days in Georgetown, he came home to his wife, and he told her this was a wonderful new world, totally deserving of liberty. And Lafayette loved liberty, and he had a very high regard for the American people and for our democracy the rest of his life over in France. Now, one of our earliest and very successful rice planters was Dr. John Mann. Dr. Mann owned Mansfield Plantation. Mansfield is 6 miles from here. It's a bed and breakfast today. Mansfield was used by Hollywood in the filming of the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson, in which Mel Gibson played our very own Smallpox. The home to your left is the home that Dr. John Mann built for his daughter Mary in 1772. Mary did not want to live at Mansfield Plantation. She wanted to live in town because she thought the country was boring. She wanted to live in town because Mary Mann loved to throw parties. So she had the second floor of that house designed entirely as a ballroom. And a lot of prominent people would come to Georgetown just to attend Mary's famous parties. But probably her most notable guest was a young lady by the name of Theodosia Burr Alston, the daughter of Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr had been vice president of the United States under Thomas Jefferson. His daughter Theodosia had married our governor, and she and the governor lived at the Oaks, which today is the bigger part of Brook Green Gardens. Now I'm going to tell you the tragic story of Theodosia, but as I do, I want to point out the old wharf you're going to see to your right. That was the original port of Georgetown in 1732. The old brick building on the left was the old red store warehouse, built to be a warehouse for goods coming in from all ports from Europe, but it's still being used for businesses even today. One of our oldest commercial buildings, 1753. But that old port has a lot to do with the tragic story of Theodosia. She and the governor lost their only child to malaria when he was 10 years old. And after his death of the only child, Theodosia became very frail and very depressed. Her father, Aaron Burr, said, Daughter, why don't you come home to New York? Come for a visit. Because her father thought it would cheer her up and help her to get well. So Theodosia comes to town, stays all night with Mary Mann, and the next morning, December 31st, 1812, Theodosia sailed away from that wharf bound for New York and vanished at sea. It remains one of the biggest mysteries in our history. Nobody knows the fate of that ship. There were no survivors. And when Governor Alston was informed of his wife's death, he became a broken man and didn't live much longer. He died at age 37 and is buried next to his little boy at Brook Green Gardens. Now on the right is an empty lot, but you can see an old foundation still visible. That used to be the Old Oak Tavern, built by a wealthy French Huguenot in 1735. It was the largest and most fashionable tavern and inn in Georgetown. The gentlemen planters from Georgetown area that like to meet back there and secretly pump up the revolution called themselves the Indigo Society. This home on the right is the John and Mary Perry Cleo's house, built in 1737, making it one of the oldest dwellings in Georgetown. And that's Fred the biker. Hi, Fred. He's out there to entertain us. She has something funny out there all the time. I get a kick out of the new owner. But when this house was built in 1737, it fronted on the Sanpit River, and we would be looking at the back of the house. Most houses back then were built facing a river because the rivers were the highways. It took Lafayette 5 days to get to Charleston on a horse. And he wrote his wife another letter. That Lafayette, he liked to write. And Lafayette told his wife it was a wretched trip because he had to go through alligator swamps. You were better off on a river, and you're surrounded by 5 rivers. The Waccamaw, the Sanpit, the Santee, the PD, and the Black River. And the Black River gets its name because the tannin from the roots of the cypress trees makes the water look black. This house was built in 1830. It's a Greek Revival style cottage. This is the style of home you will see over at Pawleys Island Beach if you go to their historic area. The planters built beach houses like this with the big porches over on Pawleys Island so they could live at the beach with their families from May through October every year. They did that because they were terrified of malaria. They called it swamp fever. They knew swamp fever was carried by mosquitoes, and mosquitoes cannot fly over a salt marsh. So you will not ever be bothered by mosquitoes at the beach at Pawleys Island. So they fled for their safety. This pretty house was built in 1815. It's a double piazza style. Double piazzas were popular back then because the families would often sit upstairs on summer evenings because it was breezier and cooler. And the prevailing winds of Georgetown helped a little bit to blow off a lot of those bugs. As you can tell already in the tour, I'm sure that bugs and mosquitoes were a major issue back then, and they really had no way to control them like we do today. two houses on the left, you'll see they are nearly identical. They were built during the Revolutionary War by a master builder whose name was William Pettino. He built them to give to his daughters, the one on the left to Mary, and the one on the right to Elizabeth. He gave them to Mary and Elizabeth on their wedding day as wedding gifts. And I'm going to tell you something awesome about the yellow house that he gave to his daughter, Elizabeth. That has been in her family ever since her wedding day. Over 200 years, no other family has ever lived in or owned that house. And I think Mr. Pettino and Miss Elizabeth would be right proud of their descendants today. The home to your right was built by Francis Withers in 1812. This was his house in town when the planter had a home in Georgetown. They called it their workhouse. It was a place to do business. They would visit the workhouse mostly in the summer. And Mr. Withers' business office was the room there by the sidewalk with the black door. And even though Francis Withers was considered the wealthiest of all of the rice planters and the indigo planters, he had a reputation for being a very generous man. And when he died, he left $5,000 and a lot so that this beautiful Winya Indigo Society Hall could be built. The Winya Indigo Society was a group of very intellectual planters. They paid their dues in indigo because they refused to accept English coins. The very first president they elected was Thomas Lynch in 1755. He and his son, Thomas Lynch Jr., attended both Continental Congresses in Philadelphia, and his son was the youngest signer of the Declaration of Independence. And sorry, ladies, but we could not set foot in there. It was a fraternal organization. We could only come to their fancy parties, and they did have a lot of those.
Does
In
it still exist?
1757,
Is it
they-
the
I'm sorry?
It doesn't exist anymore as a
The
society.
Winya Indigo Society does exist, and they still meet once in a while. I don't think they do really anything, maybe plan charity events for the community, things like that. That building today is used a lot for wedding receptions also. Wedding receptions and charity events. You're going to see a very beautiful, majestic live oak on your left, and I am going to pull up and stop for a moment where you have a pretty view. You know, they're called live oaks because they're green all
That's
year,
nice.
and that tree is a South Carolina state
Great big
champion
tree.
oak. It is estimated to be nearly
See?
700 years old,
Oh, wow.
and it's one of the 3 oldest living things in our state, and is a state champion. The tree trunk is 31 feet around, and the limb spread is nearly 130 feet. Raise your hand if you've ever seen Angel Oak in Charleston. Anybody? Well, you might want to do that sometime. Angel Oak is 1,400 years old. They think they're not really sure because it's so old. They're not really positive how old it is. But it's a really beautiful tree to see, and so is this one. But this is one of the 3 state champions. The peach-colored house is Victorian, and the blue flag, just in case you don't know it, our state flag, is indigo blue because of our indigo heritage. The old brick that you see there in the yard is called ballast brick. When the ships would leave Europe coming to America, if they did not have cargo, they would throw old bricks in the ballast of the ship to weigh it down. They'd get over here to America and didn't need the bricks anymore, so they would just throw them away. Here in South Carolina, ballast brick was our only source of brick for almost 30 years. The turn of the century house on the left You'll see those steps, those are ballast bricks. And the mortar in between the brick is called cubby. And cubby is a mixture of sand, water, and crushed oyster shells. And we are at the corner of Queen and Prince. So it's a good time for me to tell you that we were named after the Prince of Wales. And his name was George. He became King George II of England, and we liked King George II. It was King George III that we could not get along with, that stirred up all the problems and led us right into the Revolutionary War. The big house on the left was built in 1903. In the 1930s, Dr. Frances Doyle lived there with her mother. She was one of the very first female physicians in South Carolina. Her medical practice is where the two large windows are just to the right of the front doors. It was common in those days for a doctor to have the practice in the home. The large windows you see on the porch are 7.5 feet top to bottom. In the days before air conditioning, they were removable, and they would take them out for parties and entertaining, but also for cooling. And over here at this pretty house, all decorated for Memorial Day, I want to tell you an old Southern story. A true story. I'm often accused of making it up, or it's just being just an old tale, but honestly it is a true story. Let me let this car go by. To the right of this house is a smaller house, and it has an old brick chimney. Can y'all see that old brick chimney from where?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's been moved up in modern day so they can use it for other things, but that used to be the original cooking kitchen for this house. And cooking kitchens were kept far away from the houses because they were always afraid the house might catch on fire. Plus, they didn't like the heat that came out of the kitchens. But those poor cooks, not only did they cook all the time, they also were told to feed the dogs. That was how dogs were fed in those days. Scraps out of the kitchen. So when the dogs knew, I'm hungry, it's time for that food, here they'd come. And they'd gather at the kitchens, and there would be quite a lot of dogs. And all of a sudden, you got a lot of barking, and that was annoying. So here's what the cooks would do. They would take cornmeal. They would roll it in a ball, fry them in grease, throw out those dogs and say what? Hush, puppies. Right. Hush, puppies. And that seemed to do the trick. I'm going to let this car go by because I think it's a police. I don't want to break any rules. This house was built in 1750. It doesn't look that old because it's just completed a major. No, it's not a police car. It's just completed a major renovation. It's called a Charleston house because the entrance is on the side and the house is long ways to the street. Houses built before the Revolutionary War were often built this way in Charleston and Georgetown because the King of England taxed the colonies by frontage rather than by square footage. And they were mad at the king because of taxation without representation. Now, sometimes they would turn the house this way for another reason. They would often angle a house on a lot to get a better cross breeze from our rivers. Because like Charleston, we are surrounded by several big bodies of water. And so you would often get a better cross breeze by angling your house a certain way. Sometimes families would sit on the upstairs porch or even sleep there on hot summer nights to get away from that brutal summer heat. This building has been added on to tremendously through the years. It used to just be this small portion right in here and was a colonial bank in 1735. After it was a bank, it became a Masonic lodge for many years. In 1791, President George Washington did a victory tour of the new southern states, and he did visit Georgetown. And because President Washington was a Mason, this is where he came to speak. He stood on that porch and addressed an outdoor gathering, and President Washington acknowledged every veteran in the crowd that day that had fought for our independence in the Revolutionary War. And we are the county seat, and that is our old courthouse over there on the left, designed and built in 1824 by Robert Mills. Robert Mills was from Charleston, and he became one of the first professional architects in the United States. Robert Mills is best known for designing and building the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. Sadly, Robert Mills died before the Washington Monument was completed, and he did not live to see it as we see it today. Our Jewish temple is here on the right, built in 1949 and has a very small congregation today. But it used to be the opposite. Before 1800, South Carolina was the state with the highest population of people of the Jewish state. And that's because South Carolina was the first state in America to have religious freedom in its charter. So we were a safe haven for people fleeing Europe in colonial times out of fear of religious persecution. This grand house to the right was the mansion of Georgetown in the 1700s. This is the Martha Alston Piazza House. Martha was the daughter of a wealthy rice planter. She married John Piatt, and they lived here. And they were quite young when tragedy struck and her husband became ill and he died. Well, that left her a 31-year-old widow with 3 young children, and you did not want to be a widow under British rule, because the British law stated it is illegal for a woman to inherit property. So, her father says, Martha, she was an only child, and he worshipped her. He says, Martha, I'll just buy this house, and you can live here as long as you want. And Martha, or one of her descendants, lived here continually for 49 years. Now, speaking of that law, have you thought maybe once or twice on this tour these daddies were really good to these little girls? They're always building houses? Well, what they were doing is getting around the law, because that law was not popular over here in the colony. So a really good example is Mr. Pettino. He says, Mary, Elizabeth, on your wedding day, I'll give you these 2 houses. He had to wait till the wedding day because he made the deed out to who, I wonder? The husband, right. After we won the war, we decided we would get rid of that law. We didn't really like it very much. The split staircase you see there is a really beautiful Georgian design that was very popular back then. Georgian architecture called for the right and the left side of the building to be identical, like a mirror image. So they would that was our town jail. It had a 3rd floor in those days, and that's where the prisoners were housed. The sheriff lived in the middle floor with his family, and downstairs was his staff. And behind the brick wall, see that high brick wall there on your left? Behind that wall was the gallows. And that is where they carried out court-ordered hanging in the 1800s. Today, most of this block on the left is owned by the Episcopal Church. This beautiful Revolutionary War home is their parish rectory. And in the yard you'll see palm trees, and those are palmetto palms. And we are the Palmetto State. And that's because of the Battle of Fort Moultrie in Charleston, June of 1776. Patriot victory. The British retreated at nightfall. They did not come back to Charleston for 4 years. And the reason we won the Battle of Fort Moultrie is because of the walls of the fort were purposely built from palmetto logs, which is a soft, spongy wood, and the British cannonballs got stuck in the walls of the fort. So we love our palm tree. Now I'm going to get out and talk to you about this house on the left.
I'm sorry, I'm so far back, but there's a lot going on there. I can't get around. This house was built in 1770 by the Henning family. Mr. Henning stayed loyal to England in the war. They called that a Tory. And Tories were not very popular around here. But sadly for him, he had a young teenage daughter who was an ardent patriot who became a spy. She became an informant to the swamp fox, Frances Marion. Marion had a lot of informants. There was a woman down in Charleston that would drop a feather on her front porch step, and that was a signal that she had information for him. What this young girl did was fairly simple. In 1780 and 81, we were occupied by the English Army in Georgetown. Her father, being loyal to King George, housed British soldiers right up there. And nobody in the house had a clue that this young girl, right under their nose, actually a patriot. So she was free to move around the house, just doing whatever she normally did, all the time listening to those soldiers. In her room at night, she wrote on paper plans. She heard them making in the middle of the night on the back of the house into the Episcopal Cemetery where there was a certain tree where she had been told to hide the paper. Actually, it was a live oak and had a knothole that was pretty good size. She could push it up there, and one of Marion's men could eventually slip in here at night and pick that up. Well, that was about the best information in those days, without the CIA and all that, you could possibly get. It was a dangerous thing for her to do, but I'm going to tell you something. There was a lot of heroism by women behind the scenes in the Revolutionary War. You know, at that time in history, the English did not have a high opinion. They did not see women as capable. They really misjudged. They knew a woman over here in America because they were not suspect. They hardly ever questioned them. That's why they were so effective as spies. War. Those 2 years we were occupied, 1780 and 81, were the hardest 2 years of the war here. That's when Frances Marion came into society. She became one of the most colorful heroes of the Revolutionary War. He is our hometown guy, grew up here on a farm in Georgetown. Comes into the war and observes we're trying to fight the English the way they fight, with this military precision out in the open, and he knows we have no chance with fighting that way. So he and his men stay in the swamps and use the element of supplies. The hit and run, ambush, cutting supply lines, sniper fire. He even told his men, go for it, shoot officers. The English did not believe in that. That's why they hated Marion. They were determined to capture her. They never did, ever. He called his style of warfare rebel trickery. Today, everybody calls that style simply warfare. He got his nickname the Swamp Fox in Georgetown because during our occupation, he and his men raided the English here all the time. They, in turn, would try to get out and get on their horse and capture him. So one day, they chased him from Georgetown 26 miles on horseback. That was all day back then. They lost him in a swamp at nightfall, as usual. And Colonel Tarleton, this dreaded enemy, turns to his fellow English soldiers and he says, well, the devil himself couldn't catch that old fox once he gets in a swamp. And it stuck the rest of his life. Frances Marion died of old age. He and his wife are buried 38 miles from here in Pineville. And his epitaph reads, "A soldier lived without fear and died without reproach," which we think is a very fine epitaph. Now, we're going to get rolling again, and when I drive by these houses, look up at the ceiling of their porches and see the beautiful blue color that we do as a tradition in the low country on our outdoor porches. So I'll tell you why.
I don't know. Got the ceiling there. They might be.
In the old days, they were terrified of ghosts and evil spirits. They called them spirits or hags. They called those painted hags, and they got painted hags. They made your house at night and dragged you out of your bed. But they had a superstition that if you paint your outdoor porch ceiling paint blue, it'll scare them off. It'll trick them into thinking it's the sky and daylight. Today it's called piazza blue. It repels dirt daubers, mud daubers, wasps, any kind of a bug that builds a nest, won't nest in it. And I don't know why, but you'll never even see a wasp. Now, the old cemetery on your left is Episcopalian, 1730, where Miss Henning had her tree where she hid her famous notes. It's quite old. Most of our early settlers were English and therefore Episcopalian, although we had a lot of French, Huguenot at the time also. The ballast brick wall going around has about the ugliest, deadest, brown, brittle, old fern that I've seen. Actually, it isn't really dead. We just need rainfall so badly. We're in a drought situation right now. As soon as that fern gets a good rainfall, it will spring to green very fast. And because it springs to life quickly, it's called resurrection fern. And resurrection fern is found in only two places in the world, Africa and Southeast United States. The cemetery on our right is Jewish, established in 1772, making it one of the oldest Jewish cemeteries in our nation. We had 6 mayors of the Jewish faith. 3 are buried there, including Harold Kaminsky and his wife Julia. We'll be going by their home just a little bit later. 5 Confederate soldiers are interred in that cemetery. You'll see that the graves are on a diagonal because they believe in burying their loved ones facing Jerusalem. I'm going to go over here to this very historic old church. This is Bethel AME, African Methodist Episcopal. It's the oldest AME church in the South following the Civil War. It was established when the Civil War ended in 1865 by a group of freed slaves that bought the land for about $200 and established this beautiful church. Now, at that time, it was not this building. It was an old wooden building, but they raised enough money on their own to build this beautiful brick building in 1882. This church has a famous descendant. This is the family church of our former First Lady, Michelle Robinson Obama. She is a Robinson of Georgetown, but her grandfather, Fraser Robinson Jr., was the first of her family to leave, and he left in the early 1900s for a job in Chicago. And when her grandparents retired, they moved back to Georgetown and rejoined Bethel AME Church. That is when Michelle and her brother were children, so they spent summer vacations here with cousins and aunts and uncles. Her great-great-grandfather's name is Jim Robinson. He is buried here in Springfield Plantation. He stayed on as a laborer when the Civil War ended. Now earlier, I was explaining that South Carolina was very proud of having religious religious freedom in its charter. Well, I told you the truth, but there was a big glitch in that, and here's the glitch. Until the end of the Revolutionary War, it was against the law for anybody except the Episcopalians to have a church building. If you were another religion, that was just great, but you had to worship in your house, or a store, or a school. So we have something interesting at this corner. On the right is our newest church, St. Mary's Catholic. They had their first Mass in 1901. It happens to be across the street from Prince George Wimya Episcopal, the oldest church congregation in South Carolina, 1721. When they started building the church building, it took 14 years to build it because it's ballast brick. So they'd build for a while, and then they'd run out of bricks. They'd have to wait for more ships to come in. That's why the bricks are so many different colors and sizes. The concrete step in front of the church is the carriage step, where the carriages would pull up, the families would get out, and go on in to the church. That is one of the oldest colonial churches in America still in use today. The English soldiers were very damaging to the inside of that church because they slept in there at night. Well, that would have been all right, but in those days, it was the custom for a soldier to stay with his horse. So I think you know where I'm going with that one. It was a mess. It's been restored beautifully, except under the carpeting. The original floor has horse hoof imprints, and there's still some bite marks on the woodwork inside the church, but one of those horses reached over and took a bit of a bite. Now, when the Civil War ended, we had very bad economy and pretty much poverty until the turn of the century. And the gentleman that put us back on our feet again is the gentleman that built that magnificent home on your left. His name was William Doyle Morgan, and he built that house in 1880. Even by today's standards, it's a beautiful, beautiful home. And guess what? William Doyle Morgan was not born with a nickel to his name. He was the son of very poor Irish Catholic immigrants that moved here from New York City when he was a little boy. And he learned to read from nuns and became a self-taught accountant and then a very successful Georgetown banker. In 1891, at the age of 38, William Doyle Morgan was we began to recover. He had that Irish energy. In his 14 years in office, we got electricity, telephones, telegraph, safer drinking water, public schools. We even got a railroad. It was Mayor Morgan's idea to plant all these live oaks, which you see at every sidewalk of Georgetown. 2,000 trees he had planted beginning in 1899. So obviously Mayor Morgan was a forward-thinking man, but the number one thing he did is he brought back jobs and prosperity. I'm going to tell you how he did it in just a minute. First of all, I want to show you this historic home on the left. This is the Joseph Rainey House. It's registered as a National Historic Landmark in America because Joseph Rainey grew up in that house. He was the first African American ever elected to the United States Congress. He was elected in 1870 and re-elected 4 times. He ran unopposed his last 2 terms on the Republican ticket. When he retired from Washington, D.C., he moved back to his family home and passed away there. Congressman Rainey grew up a free man, but he was the son of a slave. Now, if you look at the window panes over there in those lower windows, especially when I start to move forward, you'll see how thick that glass glass is. That's the original hand-blown glass put in the house when it was built. 1700s, and still being used by the family that lives there today. If you look to your left, please, on the other side of that live oak, that old building down there is another one of our oldest commercial buildings. That was our town livery stable in the 1700s. The white boarded up windows are the horses' stalls, where the horses stuck their little heads out during the day. That would have been a very busy place in colonial times. But I want to tell you how Mayor Morgan brought back jobs and prosperity. Mayor Morgan knew that without indigo and rice, we were in good trouble economically. But Mayor Morgan had wealthy contacts in New York, so he calls them up and he says, why don't you invest in a lumber company? We'll put it in downtown Georgetown on the Sanford River, and you'll make money and we'll have jobs. Because there are thousands of trees in the Carolinas. He talks these wealthy New Yorkers into a $6 million investment. And in 1903, we opened the doors of the Atlantic Coast Lumber Company. It was a huge success. It totally revitalized Georgetown. By 1913, it was the largest lumber company on the East Coast. So naturally, everybody in Georgetown thinks happy days are here to stay. Well, sadly, not exactly. It flourished until the Great Depression. In 1932, the Atlantic Coast Lumber Company went broke and closed its doors forever. It was located to your right down there on the Sanford River. There were many, many buildings, but they were later destroyed by fire. But after its demise, we got lucky again. In 1936, International Paper began building their mill here. And by 1942, our paper mill was the largest paper mill in the world. It's not the biggest in the world anymore, but it's a large mill and a big employer even today. And this is the Robert Stewart House, built about 1770. This is where President George Washington arrived on his April 1791 visit. He came by boat down the Sanford River into Georgetown and docked at the back of this beautiful home. He is believed to have stayed there one night before going on to Charleston. So we can truly say Washington slept here. The home here on the right is named after its final owners, Harold and Julia Kaminsky. They bought this house, and I'll pull closer in just a minute. I got a lot of traffic here right now. The Kaminskys bought this house in the 1930s, and at that time, Harold was in the Navy Reserves. And when it looked like World War II was on the horizon, the Navy activated him and sent him to, of all places, Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Lieutenant Commander Kaminsky was the duty officer that was on watch when we were attacked December 7, 1941. He was the voice that was going out on the airwaves that was screaming, "We are under attack." In the movie Tora, 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 his character is portrayed. When World War II ended, he and Julia returned to their home here, and he was elected mayor. Okay, finally, I can show you the house. Julia Kaminsky passed away last in 1972, and because they had no children, Julia willed the home to the city as a gift to be a museum to honor her husband and his mother, Rose. On the right is our federal building built by the United States government in 1906 to be a combination customs house and post office. It's a law office today. The pretty little park here on the right, if you haven't walked the river, that's a pretty place to begin or end your walk. It's named in honor of Congressman Joseph Brady. In 2018, USA Today named Georgetown the #1 small coastal town on the East Coast. We're not #1 anymore, but we are still in the top 5. Our economy comes from 3 things mostly. #1 is still that darn paper mill, but second is my favorite, visitors and tourists. And the third thing is our commercial fishing. Those are the 3 main things that keep Georgetown going strong today. I'm going to have to pull over here since that fan has my loading space. But I think it's better anyway. It's not quite so steep when you get off of the tram.